Good morning, afternoon, evening, or night, everybody. My name is Dr. Oolong. I am the Mad Doctor of Spark, increasingly becoming the Mad Doctor of Blaston as well, and it is time for another tier list video. We recently had a bit of a balance change that came with a new update. The meta's been going strong, and I think it's time to readdress the tier list video that I made all the way back in April. Same rules as last time. All of this is my opinion. All of this is based off the current state of the meta. This is the final tier list. S tier weapons are either on every build right now or should be. They're weapons that you really can't live without. A tier, these weapons are all really good value for their cooldown. All of them are what I would consider to be meta weapons. B tier is where we start getting out of the meta. Some of them can still stand up on their own. Some of them are going to need some sort of assistance. C is where we start to get niche, ones that definitely need more support or even an entire build formed around them. And D weapons are just weapons that I really don't think are very good right now. Alright, so let's jump right into it, and let's jump into the thing I probably got the most wrong on my previous tier list, which is the Vector. It's arguably the best weapon in the game right now. It's hugely versatile. You can shoot this straight at your opponent, and even if they dodge, it'll come back and hit them. You can shoot this at the side of the arena and have it bounce back around and get them from the side. It can get around shield. Overall, just very solid weapon and does a decent amount of damage. Now, the one thing I will say is that there's been a bit of a technique that's been developed, drop blocking, where you drop the weapon into the bullet, you delete the bullet, you pick back up the weapon, rinse and repeat. That might reduce the rank of this in the future, but honestly, even in that case, you can then just shoot it at the side, and that's much harder for them to drop block. Definitely going up into S tier. And then this might be a controversial choice. The normal shield and the 2-second Aegis shield both going into S tier with, you know, Vector, WildCat, Hammer Ellipse being run in a lot of builds right now. It's become necessary to run at least one shield. You'll see people running two. They're also hugely versatile. You can use them to delete projectiles. You can use them to defend yourself against beams. They do surprisingly good damage as well. I mean, people are obviously seeing value in these shields. Both of those solidly going into S tier. A tier, we're going to start out with the WildCat. Now, WildCat recently got some buff, but I feel like this is mostly seeing play due to the prevalence of the bullet spam build. The Vector with the WildCat with the Hammer Ellipse. It's on a 3-second cooldown, and it'll take you roughly 3 seconds to get through the entire clip. So this is really the definition of a spray and pray weapon. Hammer Ellipse, the nerfs could not put this down. This weapon probably has the most value for its cooldown. Usually the focus will be to send out a couple lines of Hammer Ellipse bullets and then follow it up with something else, like, for example, the Viper Ellipse. Honestly, even following it up with Vector Shot or WildCat Shot. If they get out of the way of one of those streams of bullets, they're probably going to run into more bullets. Solidly up into A tier. Next up is the Viper Ellipse. Did recently get a nerf where its bullet speed was increased, but the clip size was reduced down to 3. Still a really solid weapon doing 30 damage a hit. The reason this got brought down to A tier is because people have learned how to dodge it. And a lot of people are still running this weapon like you can just use it on its own. Gotta now have something to pressure your opponent, which is why you'll see it so many times paired with the Hammer Ellipse. Catch them off guard with the Viper and do 30 damage, or they're forced to dodge out of the way and into another stream of bullets. Overall, a very solid weapon. Next up is the Hurricane. 4 seconds, 5 bullets. Each one of those is doing 10 damage. It's really the versatility with this weapon. You can shoot it up for defense and zoning. You can shoot it straight forward if you're trying to do damage. Also got a rate of fire increase, which has definitely helped its offensive capabilities. A solid all-around weapon at 4 seconds, very good. Next is the FrostByte. Oh, how the mighty have fallen. There were some slight nerfs to the hitbox that this was using, but honestly the hitbox was kind of busted before. People have just learned how to get around this. If you don't have something else to use it with, it's very hard to hit. Also, because bullet spam has been so popular, you really gotta find a clear spot, because if it hits any one of those bullets, it'll just pop before it even gets the chance to hit your opponent. Still, if you do hit it, blinds, does 15 damage, which is a very good amount of damage for a 2-second cooldown weapon. Just not the S tier wonder that it was before. LanceNade. LanceNade is the only nade going into the A tier. You can throw it up behind you, or you can throw it behind your opponent, get good angle of attacks. Also, because it doesn't necessarily have to go close to the podium, they don't really get an opportunity to shield it or grab it. Plus, the duration's really long on it, and the damage is pretty decent. Only nade going up into A tier. NovaNade. Nova. Imagine that there was an item that you could get that allowed you to have 3 4-second shields on a 7-second cooldown. And that's basically how I use Nova. I'm not using this as an offensive zoning weapon. I'm using it as a shield generator. Still gets bodied by other people who actually have shields, bodied by people who are running builds that have high collision damage, but still an overall solid weapon. As Tether gets more popular alongside bullet spam, I think we'll see a lot more Nova in play. And finally, we have the Tether. Tether did recently receive a buff where it dropped the damage you take when you break the tether from 10 to 5, which was a significant buff and did make the weapon a lot more viable. This is the answer to a lot of builds because it can out damage them. Your opponent can whittle you down as much as they want, but it only takes 1 or 2 good rounds with tether and take away your opponent's health bar. Weapons you'd want to use this with, definitely the WildCat for damage. The Hurricane has good collision damage, so if your opponent's throwing up 4-second shield, you can actually use the Hurricane to get rid of it. Raptor's pretty good with it. It's a good low cooldown weapon, but I think there are better options. And Hammer, probably the highest damage output, but I still have a hard time hitting this. Yeah, Tether definitely going into A tier. B tier, we're starting to get a little bit off of the meta, and B, again, is for Bunker. It's a good answer to bullet spam, and it's also a good answer to Tether. It's not a perfect answer to both. If you're focused so much on putting up your shields, you're never going to get an opportunity to deal damage to your opponent. So when it works, it's great. But if your opponent has anything that can get around it, or they've done a little bit of damage to you at the beginning of the round and then they can kind of just chill for the rest of it, it's much harder to get back up when you're using the Bunker. As a last note, stop throwing your actual shield object at people. If you hold on to anyone's weapon, it will not respawn, and that also includes the shields. So when people throw this at me and I am having trouble getting around them, I just hold it. Please don't do that if you're running Bunker. I've seen too much of that. Next up is NovaNade. NovaNade actually getting put down to B tier. It's got its counters, but overall this is still the vector of the nade world, in that you can throw it into someone's face, and if it pops, it immediately does 30 damage. You still do have to get close in order to use this effectively. However, this is probably one of the riskiest nades to grab, and if your opponent is constantly grabbing your nades, you can actually just delay it by a little bit, and as soon as they reach out to grab it, boom, NovaNade, and they've still taken 30 damage. So overall, probably the best out of the damage dealing nades. The 6-second cooldown on this really hurts it. Moving on, MajesticNade. MajesticNade takes up a ton of room on your opponent's podium, and on a 3-second cooldown is one of the few nades that actually can be effectively spammed. What you should try and do is throw either above your opponent or off to the side of your opponent, because the travel distance will bring it right into the middle of your opponent's field of play, which is exactly what you want. This probably might be my favorite nade. Takes a lot of practice, takes a lot of skill to use. I think overall it's a very solid weapon. Now AvalanceNade. It's a 4-second cooldown. It creates basically a bunch of bullets which, if they hit, they spawn little beam cages, which also do damage over time. The advantage that this has over the MajesticNade is that it's a much wider effective hitbox. The bullets are going to spread out a lot more. They're going to have to move further out of the way to dodge it. However, only 1 or 2 of those pellets hits them. It really doesn't do that much damage. I think that this also complements bullet spam. It's hard to sometimes see what bullets go to what weapons. When bullet spam reduces in popularity, we're going to see a corresponding drop in the popularity of this. Next up is Raptor. Raptor also going solidly into B tier. Kind of got a buff. The clip size was increased to 6. The cooldown remained the same, and the damage only got reduced by 2, so it does more effective damage. The bullets are so slow, it's really hard to effectively hit your opponent, but you can do a lot with it. You can shoot through Hammer Ellipse bullets and clear a path for yourself. Against Nova Helix, this just destroys it outright. The bullets have good collision damage on them. Overall, it's hard to go wrong with 2-second weapons. Not enough to get it into A tier, but definitely going to go solidly into B tier. And the last one from B tier, the SuperMajestic. So SuperMajestic's on a 10-second cooldown. The Majestic does 15 damage a tick. The duration on it is significantly longer than the normal Majestic, or even the MajesticNade. Is it worth the 10-second cooldown? Well, that depends on what weapons you're pairing it with. It's kind of a big hit or miss weapon when you use it, and it's on a 10-second cooldown, but when it works, I can't deny that it doesn't work. So gonna go into B tier. Now let's get into C tier, the weapons I don't view as meta. I'm surprised at how much I see the HammerNade still being run. Another 6-second cooldown nade. And compared to the NovaNade, I feel like it's very underwhelming. The damage might be a bit more consistent, but it's incredibly easy to dodge. There are huge gaps between the bullets that you can easily kind of squeeze through. I don't see this getting anywhere above C tier. Next up, also a hammer, the normal hammer. Basically my same complaints from last time. It's a really narrow spread of bullets. If your opponent can just get out of the way, it's very easy to dodge. The rate of fire buff definitely helps, but I still think it suffers from the same issues it did before. I think that there are other better 3-second cooldown weapons, Vector, WildCat. If you want to run something like this, you might as well go for the spread and just go for the full 6-second Hammer Ellipse. Also in C tier, we have the normal Viper. This got the same treatment that the Viper Ellipse got, where its clip size was reduced, but the projectile speed increased. The lack of curve makes it a lot easier to dodge. To run this effectively on a build, you're going to need a lot of zoning. You're going to need a lot of area denial. Force them to make the decision of taking a Viper bullet or jumping into one of the other hazards that you've let. But honestly, for 2 additional seconds, you could get the curve. And I think that's just straight up better. As a last note, some people do run both of these. When it works, and it can do 60 damage at once. But usually what happens is that once they have those 2 Vipers, they don't really have anything else to pressure with. Gonna go into C tier. Also in C tier, base lance. I put it into A tier last time because I thought that with the 4-second cooldown and with the fact that it's a beam, needless to say, I was wrong. The big thing that kills it is the duration and the damage on the beams. They aren't really a threat. Even if you do fence your opponent into a corner, they can just walk through the beams and only take a little bit of damage. I think you're better running the 4-second cooldown LanceNade because the duration is longer, you have more flexibility in where you put it, and I think it does more damage. The Nova Helix used to be a scary weapon. If your opponent has an answer for this weapon, it's pretty much worthless. But if your opponent doesn't have an answer for it, then it becomes actually something that's pretty scary because each one of these is still doing 25 damage a pop. People have used it effectively against me in sort of longer cooldown builds, and I think it does have a place in C tier for sure. D tier weapons. These are weapons that I don't respect. First up is the Raptor Ellipse. If you thought that the B tier Raptor was hard to hit, wait till you try this boy on for size. I've seen people using this in queue recently, trying to use it in queue. It's still so easy to dodge and so hard to hit. Unless you're a pro with Ellipse weapons, I would not suggest running this. Next up is the Rapide. On a 10-second cooldown and fires off 3 beams and has a higher rate of fire, and each one of the beams does 15 damage a tick. Once you've created the 3 beams, one of 2 things is going to happen. One, your opponent's going to take a ton of damage, or they're going to have a shield, or they're going to have something else that gives them just enough space to squeeze out of it. Unlike the SuperMajestic, this does kind of get bodied by shields. And on a 10-second cooldown, it's not worth running it. Next up in D tier, the Nova Hurricane. 6-second cooldown. Same general mechanics as the Hurricane. Pellets are bigger, they do more damage on hit, and you only have a clip size of 3. I think that where this falls short is the versatility. Bullets are much slower, they're much easier to deal with one shield. When you fire them forward, they aren't nearly as fast moving as the normal Hurricane. So it's going in D tier. I don't really see a lot of people running this either way. Next up is probably the worst non-meme weapon, the normal Majestic. 6-second cooldown, fires off 2 beam cages. The issue with this weapon is the beam cages themselves. They don't have a very long duration, and they don't do a lot of damage. This isn't a very big threat to your opponent. Again, that duration compared to the SuperMajestic is much, much lower. So what happens most of the time is that the Majestics disappear before they can actually even be a threat. I would love to see this weapon maybe at a lower cooldown, or maybe increase the duration on the beam cages. That way they actually cross my opponent's side of the screen. Definitely going into D tier. And last up is the Vandal. Going into D tier really at the end of the day because it does 0 damage. Now there are cases where the Vandal can be very, very useful. Eats up NovaNades, eats up shields, eats up bunker. If you can snipe a lot of the nades, you can take them right out of the air. But if your opponent isn't running one of those weapons, you're kind of just SOL. Run this for the memes, and you're going to laugh in your opponent's face. If they don't have one of the weapons that it counters, you can blind them. Anyways, that's going to be my updated tier list. I feel pretty confident about this one, unlike the previous one that I did. Do let me know in the comments below if you think that I'm wrong. Remember, fight nights time has now moved to 12 o'clock Pacific time on Saturdays if you want to go ahead and join in on that. Links are going to be in the description below. I've been Dr. Oolong, and just remember, a doctor a day keeps the assholes away. And I will see y'all later.